Letters from the Frozen Frontier. The Chronicles of Sarah Bennett. Winter of 1886-1887. Western Nebraska Territory. November 28th, 1886. My dearest sister Margaret, as I sit here watching the first snowfall of what promises to be a terrible winter, I find myself compelled to document these days for you, for our children, and perhaps for history itself. The flakes drift past our window like harbingers of trials to come, each one a whisper of the ordeal that awaits us on these unforgiving plains. How different this scene appears from the snow we knew as children in Boston, do you remember? Those gentle flakes that dusted the cobblestones and made the common look like a fairy tale illustration. Here, on these endless plains, snow carries a different message entirely, one of isolation, endurance, and the thin line that separates the living from the dead. I can almost see you shaking your head as you read this, wondering how your sensible younger sister came to live in such a place. When I married James 7 years ago, and we headed west with nothing but a wagon full of hopes and a few precious possessions, I thought I understood what frontier life would mean. I imagined hardship, certainly, but the kind that could be overcome with determination and hard work. I never imagined that survival itself would become a daily negotiation with forces so vast and indifferent that they make human ambition seem like the buzzing of insects. The transformation in James over these years amazes me still. The man who courted me in Boston drawing rooms, who spoke eloquently of manifest destiny and the opportunities waiting in the West, has become someone I might not have recognized then. His hands, once soft enough to turn the pages of philosophy books without calluses, are now scarred maps of practical knowledge. Every line tells a story. The thin white mark across his palm from the time he learned not to grip a saw blade, the permanent stain on his fingertips from years of handling rope and leather, the missing tip of his little finger from a moment's carelessness with an axe 3 winters ago. James stands beside me, his weathered hands tracing patterns in the frost on our small window. "It's going to be a hard one, Sarah," he says, and I hear the weight of accumulated wisdom in his voice. 7 years on this frontier have taught us both to read nature's warnings, the restless behavior of animals, the thickness of their winter coats, the frantic activity of creatures preparing for something they sense in their bones. Just yesterday, he returned from checking our fence lines with observations that chilled me more than the dropping temperature. The horses, he reported, had grown coats so thick they resembled small buffalo. Our milk cow, ordinarily placid, had become restless, pacing the confines of her pen, as if seeking escape from something only she could perceive. Even the barn cats, usually independent to the point of arrogance, had begun clustering together near the warmth of the animals, their wild instincts overriding their solitary natures. The old Lakota who taught me to read the signs, James continues, his breath fogging the glass, used to say that animals know things our civilized minds have forgotten. They don't need almanacs or weather instruments. They feel the change in their bones, in the way the wind shifts, in the quality of light that filters through increasingly grey skies. I remember laughing gently when he first shared such observations with me. It seemed like superstition, the kind of folklore that educated people should know better than to credit. But then came the winter of 1883, when we ignored similar signs, and I learned the cost of dismissing indigenous wisdom. We nearly lost everything, our livestock, our stored food, and very nearly our lives, because I thought Eastern education made me wiser than accumulated generations of survival knowledge. The Lakota man who shared his understanding with James was named Thunderhawk, and though I never met him personally, his teachings have kept our family alive through 3 brutal winters. James speaks of him with the reverence usually reserved for professors or ministers, and indeed his classroom was more vital than any university. Thunderhawk's lessons came without books or lectures, but through patient observation of the natural world and hard-earned understanding of how to live in harmony with forces that can never be conquered, only respected. Our cabin feels smaller today, somehow more precious. 14 feet by 16 feet of hand-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss and hope. It's not much to look at, but it's ours, and more importantly, it's strong. We built it to last, to protect, to shelter us when the world outside becomes a white hell that devours the unprepared. Every log in these walls tells a story of back-breaking labour and careful planning. James cut each one himself during the summer of 1882, selecting trees with the patience of a man who understood that his family's lives would depend on his choices. Oak for strength, where we could find it. Pine where oak wasn't available, but seasoned properly and chosen for minimal knots that might weaken under stress. Each log was stripped of bark with meticulous care. Bark left on timber invites insects, and insects create weak spots that winter wind exploits mercilessly. The chinking between the logs represents hours of experimentation and refinement. At first, we used simple mud mixed with prairie grass, but our first winter taught us that this mixture cracked and fell out, leaving gaps that turned our home into a sieve for Arctic winds. Now our chinking is a carefully developed recipe. Clay-rich earth from the creek bed, mixed with dried moss gathered from the shaded north sides of trees, bound together with horsehair from our animals' winter grooming, and sealed with a mixture of pine pitch and rendered animal fat. I remember watching James develop this formula through trial and error, each failure a lesson that could have been fatal if we hadn't learned quickly enough. He would test small batches on pieces of scrap wood, subjecting them to temperature changes, moisture, and pressure, until he found a combination that remained flexible enough not to crack in extreme cold, yet strong enough to keep out wind and snow. The roof above us slopes just enough to shed rain and snow without creating excessive weight loads on our supporting beams. James learned this calculation from a German carpenter in town, who had built houses in climates even harsher than ours. The shake shingles we split ourselves, each one shaped by hand to overlap perfectly with its neighbours, creating layers of protection that have kept us dry through 3 years of prairie storms. Beneath our feet, the floor is constructed of thick pine planks, fitted together so tightly that no gaps exist for cold air to seep up from the earth below. James spent an entire week with his plane and chisel, shaping each board until they joined seamlessly. Under these boards lies a foundation of stone. Not the grand fieldstone foundation of eastern houses, but carefully selected rocks from our creek bed, positioned to create air circulation that prevents moisture from rotting our floor while maintaining insulation from the ground's winter cold. The children don't yet understand what's coming. Emma, our 7-year-old, chatters excitedly about building snow forts. Little Robert, barely 6, wonders if the snow will be deep enough to hide in, and Mary, sweet 4-year-old Mary, claps her hands at each falling flake as if winter were nothing more than nature's carnival come to visit. Emma's innocence both breaks my heart and fills me with determination. She remembers last winter, but through the magical lens of childhood that transforms hardship into adventure. She recalls the excitement of sleeping close to the stove, the special feeling of drinking hot milk sweetened with our precious sugar. The way her father's stories seemed more vivid by firelight. She doesn't remember the nights I lay awake calculating our food stores, or the morning James came back from checking the animals with frostbite on his cheeks, or the week when our neighbour's child nearly died from pneumonia with no doctor within 50 miles. Robert, bless his eager heart, has absorbed his father's lessons about frontier life with the enthusiasm of someone who sees only the heroic aspects of survival. He can identify animal tracks in mud, knows which berries are safe to eat and which will make you sick, and has learned to handle an axe with startling competence for his age. Yet he still sees winter as an exciting challenge rather than a potentially fatal test of preparation and endurance. Little Mary exists in that blessed state of early childhood, where the world's dangers are filtered through the protective love of parents who have, so far, managed to shield her from the worst realities of frontier life. To her, winter means extra cuddles, interesting new games played indoors, and the wonderful smell of bread baking in our small oven. She has no understanding that the bread comes from carefully hoarded flour, or that the warmth surrounding her requires constant vigilance and fuel that grows more precious with each passing day. Sometimes I envy their innocence, Margaret. There are moments when I watch them playing with their simple toys, dolls made from scraps of fabric, wooden animals carved by their father's patient hands, games invented from nothing but imagination, and I remember the carefree nature of childhood that I took for granted in our Boston home. They will never know the security we experienced, growing up with servants and central heating, and neighbours just beyond our front door. But they are learning skills and developing resilience that our sheltered upbringing never provided. Emma can already cook simple meals, tend to her younger siblings with the competence of someone much older, and understand the critical importance of conserving resources. Robert knows how to care for animals, recognise signs of sickness in our livestock, and perform dozens of small tasks that keep a frontier household functioning. Even Mary, young as she is, understands that some things are precious and must not be wasted, that loud voices might disturb the baby animals, and that helping her family is more important than her individual desires. But I know better. We all know better, we who have survived previous winters on these plains. I think of the Millers, God rest their souls, who ignored the signs last year and paid the ultimate price. Their cabin stands empty now, a monument to the cost of underestimating this land. The Miller tragedy haunts every frontier family in our area, not because it was unique, but because it was so preventable. Thomas Miller was a good man, hard-working and intelligent, but he came from Illinois where winters, while cold, never reached the bone-deep brutality of the Nebraska plains. When the old-timers warned him about the signs they were seeing in the fall of 1885, the same signs James learned to recognize from Thunderhawk, Thomas dismissed their concerns as the superstitions of uneducated men. He had read agricultural journals that assured him modern farming methods could overcome any climate challenges. He had charts showing average snowfall and temperature ranges that suggested Nebraska winters were merely slightly more severe versions of what he'd experienced back home. What those charts couldn't convey was the difference between cold weather that inconveniences and cold weather that kills without mercy or warning. The Millers built their cabin quickly, more concerned with size than with the quality of construction. They chinked their walls with simple mud that cracked and fell out with the first freeze. Their roof, while attractive, was too flat to shed heavy snow loads effectively. Most critically, they didn't stockpile adequate fuel, believing they could venture out for firewood whenever supplies ran low. When the blizzard of January 1886 struck, it lasted for 8 days. 8 days of howling wind, sub-zero temperatures, and snow that fell so heavily it buried their cabin to the windowsills. Their inadequate fuel supply ran out on the 6th day. By the time neighbours could reach them after the storm passed, all 4 family members had frozen to death in their beds, huddled together for warmth that never came. We found them when a party of men, including James, finally dug through to their door. Thomas had torn apart furniture and even some of the interior walls trying to feed their fire, but green wood burns poorly and produces little heat. They had run out of food as well, their stores depleted by poor planning and the extra calories needed to survive in extreme cold. The children were still in their parents' arms. Little Susan, only 2 years old, and baby Margaret, named after you, dear sister, were wrapped in every blanket and quilt the family owned. But cloth, no matter how thick, cannot replace the steady heat of a well-maintained fire. The Millers learned too late that preparation is not optional on the frontier. It's the difference between life and death, with no second chances for those who guess wrong. Their cabin still stands because no one has the heart to tear it down, but neither can anyone bear to live in it. It serves as a grim reminder visible from our own windows, especially now as snow begins to dust its sagging roof and drift against its poorly constructed walls. Sometimes, on clear days, I see Emma staring at it with the solemn expression of a child trying to understand mortality. I haven't told her the full story. She's too young for such harsh truths. But frontier children learn early that life here carries risks unknown in more civilized places. Tonight, as candlelight flickers across these pages and James repairs harnesses by the fire, I begin this chronicle not knowing if we'll all survive to see spring. But I pray that these words will serve as testament to our struggles, our hopes, and our determination to carve out a life in this beautiful, terrible wilderness. The harness work James performs with such concentration represents more than simple maintenance. It's a meditation on the interconnectedness of survival. Each leather strap must be supple enough to remain flexible in sub-zero temperatures, yet strong enough to bear the loads that might mean the difference between reaching help and dying in a snowdrift. He works the leather with neat's foot oil, his strong fingers finding weak spots and worn areas that could fail at critical moments. A broken harness in summer means delay, he often says, threading his needle with the thick thread we special ordered from St. Louis. A broken harness in winter means death. Tonight, as he reinforces the traces that will pull our sled through deep snow, I understand that he's not merely repairing equipment, he's preparing weapons in our ongoing war against the elements. The candlelight by which I write costs us dearly in our carefully hoarded supplies, but some things cannot be postponed until more favourable times. These letters to you serve multiple purposes. They maintain my connection to the life we once shared. They preserve our experiences for our children to read someday, and they provide a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. In documenting our trials, I transform them from random suffering into meaningful human experience. The children sleep now in the loft above us, their breathing creating small clouds in the cooling air. Emma insisted on carrying Mary up the ladder herself, demonstrating the protective instincts that frontier life cultivates in the young. Robert, ever practical, arranged their blankets with the methodical care he's learned from watching his father prepare for anything that might go wrong. From where I sit, I can see our stores arranged along the walls with mathematical precision. Sacks of flour and beans, crocks of preserved meat, strings of dried apples and pumpkin, jars of vegetables we canned during the brief abundance of harvest time. Each item represents hours of labour, careful planning, and the accumulated knowledge of what it takes to sustain 5 lives through months when the outside world becomes uninhabitable. But beyond these material preparations lies something harder to quantify: the mental and spiritual readiness that winter demands. Margaret, you cannot imagine what it means to know that for the next 4 or 5 months we will be utterly alone with our choices. No doctor if someone falls seriously ill. No neighbour to borrow from if we've miscalculated our needs. No rescue if we make a mistake that would be merely inconvenient in town but fatal in isolation. The preparations are complete. The root cellar is stocked. The firewood is stacked. The animals are sheltered. Now we wait, and we endure, and we fight for every precious day. Your loving sister, Sarah. December 5th, 1886. Beloved Margaret, the world has transformed overnight into something alien and hostile. When James opened our door this morning to tend the animals, the cold that rushed in was like a living thing, hungry, vicious, seeking to steal the very breath from our lungs. The thermometer reads 20 degrees below our worst expectations, and this is merely the beginning. I must describe this cold to you, Margaret, because words like frigid or freezing fail completely to convey the reality of what we're experiencing. This is cold that has substance, cold that seems to have weight and intention. When James opened the door, the air that entered our cabin didn't simply flow. It poured like an invisible liquid, settling in the corners and seeking the warmest spots with the persistence of floodwater. Within moments, frost began forming on every metal surface inside our home. The nails in our walls grew white whiskers of ice. Our water bucket, sitting no more than 3 feet from the stove, developed a skin of ice so quickly I could watch it spread across the surface. Even our breath became visible inside the cabin, creating small personal weather systems that dissipated slowly in the dry air. The children woke to find frost patterns on their blankets where their breathing had moistened the fabric during the night. Little Mary thought it was magic. Beautiful crystalline designs that appeared overnight like fairy artwork. Emma, older and more perceptive, pulled her covers tighter around her neck with the instinctive understanding that something dangerous had changed while she slept. James prepared for his morning chores with the methodical care of a soldier preparing for battle. First, the long underwear, heavy wool that he pulled on while still lying beneath our quilts, conserving the body heat that would dissipate rapidly once he began moving in the cold air. Over this, flannel shirt, wool vest, heavy jacket lined with rabbit fur he had tanned himself the previous spring. The process of dressing for outdoor work in such temperatures becomes a ritual of survival. Wool socks, 2 pairs, with the outer pair large enough to accommodate the bulk of the inner pair without creating pressure points that could cut off circulation. Leather boots, pre-warmed by the fire and treated with bear grease to repel moisture. Canvas outer pants over wool trousers, leather gloves inside heavy mittens, a wool scarf wrapped around his neck and face, leaving only his eyes exposed. But even with all these preparations, James's eyes watered constantly in the bitter air, the tears freezing into tiny crystals on his cheekbones. His nose ran continuously, and he had to be careful not to touch his bare skin to any metal surfaces, tools, door handles, even the harness buckles, which had become so cold they could freeze flesh to metal in seconds of contact. The animals, poor creatures, huddled together for warmth in the barn, their breath creating clouds of vapour that froze instantly and fell as snow inside their shelter. Our milk cow's udder had to be warmed with cloth heated by the fire before milking was possible. and even then the milk began to freeze in the bucket during the short walk back to the cabin. Most alarming was James's report about our well. The water level has dropped significantly as the ground frost penetrates deeper, and ice has begun forming around the edges despite the protection of the wooden cover he built last autumn. If the well freezes completely, we'll be reduced to melting snow for all our water needs, a process that consumes enormous amounts of our precious fuel and produces water that tastes flat and unsatisfying compared to the sweet well water we've grown accustomed to. I write to you now by lamplight, though we must ration the oil with religious care. Each drop of fuel is precious when it might mean the difference between light and darkness, warmth and death. Our cabin has become an island of humanity in an ocean of white desolation, and we are the castaways clinging to its shores. The lamp oil we use comes from town at considerable expense, 50 cents per gallon when we can get it, which makes each hour of bright light a luxury we must weigh against other necessities. James calculated that our current supply, used sparingly, might last until February if we burned the lamp for no more than 2 hours each evening. This means that most of our winter evenings will unfold in the dancing shadows cast by firelight, which creates its own kind of beauty but makes detailed work nearly impossible. I've learned to prepare for these evening hours by positioning my sewing, mending and letter-writing materials where they'll catch the maximum benefit from our small flame. Tonight, as I write these words, I sit close enough to the lamp that I can feel its heat on my face, a small circle of warmth and light that makes me feel almost decadent despite our careful economy. The isolation that winter imposes on frontier families goes deeper than simple physical separation from neighbours and town. It's a psychological isolation that can wear down the strongest spirits if not actively resisted. We are alone not just with each other, but with our fears, our doubts, our memories of warmer, easier times, and our uncertainty about whether our preparations will prove adequate. Last night, after the children were asleep, James and I sat by the fire discussing what we would do if various disasters befell us. What if the chimney caught fire and damaged our stove? What if one of us became seriously injured or ill? What if our food supplies ran lower than anticipated? What if the cold proved more severe or lasted longer than we'd planned for? These conversations, while necessary, carry their own burden. To survive, we must think constantly about failure, death, and catastrophe, imagining scenarios we hope never to face. Yet there's also an intimacy to this isolation that has strengthened our family bonds in unexpected ways. With nowhere to go and little to distract us from each other's company, we've discovered depths in our relationships that the busier rhythms of warmer seasons never allowed us to explore. Emma, for instance, has revealed a talent for storytelling that keeps her younger siblings enthralled for hours. Robert has shown an artistic bent, creating elaborate drawings with charcoal on pieces of precious paper, depicting the animals and scenes from our daily life with surprising skill. Even little Mary, barely 4 years old, has developed a remarkable capacity for patient observation. She can sit for long periods watching the flames in our stove, apparently finding endless fascination in the dancing patterns of fire and shadow. When she describes what she sees, dancing ladies, flying birds, castles falling down, her imagery reveals an imagination that transforms our austere surroundings into realms of wonder. The walls around us tell their own story of survival. These logs, cut and placed with such care by James's hands, now bear a coating of frost on their inner surfaces. The very nails hold crystals of ice, as if winter has claimed even the metal that holds our shelter together. Yet the walls stand firm, and for this I am grateful beyond words. Our iron stove has become the beating heart of our existence. We've arranged our meagre furniture around it like supplicants before an altar, because that's exactly what it has become. The altar at which we worship the god of warmth, making our daily offerings of wood and buffalo chips, praying that our fuel will outlast the cold. This morning's bread making became an act of defiance against winter's cruelty. My hands, working the dough, generated their own heat. The oven, baking our daily sustenance, pushed back against the cold that seeks to claim our small world. The children gathered close, their faces flushed with warmth and anticipation, unaware that their mother's simple act of baking had become a battle in an undeclared war. The process of making bread in winter requires adaptations that would puzzle our former neighbours in Boston. The yeast, for instance, must be kept warm enough to remain active, which means storing it close to my body under multiple layers of clothing. The rising dough needs consistent temperature, so I've learned to create a warming chamber by placing the bread bowl in a larger basin filled with heated stones, then covering the entire arrangement with quilts. Even the flour presents challenges in extreme cold. It must be brought to room temperature gradually, or the sudden change when mixed with warm liquid can affect the bread's texture. I store our flour sacks close to the stove, but not so close that they dry out or, worse, attract vermin that might have found their way into our cabin seeking warmth and food. The kneading itself becomes a meditation on survival. As my hands work the dough, feeling it transform from a shaggy mixture into smooth, elastic bread to be, I'm aware that this simple act connects me to thousands of women throughout history who have fed their families under difficult circumstances. There's comfort in knowing that the basic human activities, making bread, tending children, maintaining warmth, continue unchanged regardless of how hostile the environment becomes. The children's participation in bread making serves purposes beyond simple help with household tasks. Emma learns patience as she waits for the dough to rise, understanding that some processes cannot be rushed regardless of our eagerness for results. She measures ingredients with the precision of a pharmacist, knowing that in our isolated circumstances, waste is not just unfortunate, it's potentially dangerous. Robert's job is maintaining the fire at just the right level for baking. Too hot, and the bottom of the bread burns while the top remains raw. Too cool, and the bread never develops the proper crust that helps preserve it. For the several days a single loaf must last our family. He's learned to read the colour of flames, the sound of burning wood, the feel of heat radiating from the stove's surface. Little Mary's contribution is sorting dried berries that will add to special loaves, a precious treat that makes ordinary bread feel like celebration. Her small fingers work with surprising concentration, separating the good berries from those that have shriveled too much or show signs of spoilage. She takes pride in this responsibility, understanding that her careful work affects the quality of food her family will eat. The smell of baking bread fills our small cabin with more than pleasant aromas. It creates an atmosphere of abundance and normalcy that combats the psychological effects of isolation and privation. When the bread emerges from the oven, golden brown and steaming, we gather around it as if it were a religious artifact. In many ways, it is. This bread represents our successful transformation of stored ingredients into sustenance, our maintenance of civilized customs despite primitive conditions, our faith that tomorrow will come and we will need food to sustain us through it. When James returned from his morning duties, ice crystals clung to his beard like tiny diamonds. His mittened hands, despite their protection, had stiffened into claws that required slow, painful thawing in cool water. The screaming memes, the old-timers call it, that agony of flesh returning to life after winter's touch. The sight of my husband battling frostbite fills me with a fear that goes beyond concern for his immediate comfort. Out here, hands are everything. A farmer with damaged fingers cannot handle tools effectively, cannot milk cows properly, cannot perform the 100 small tasks that keep a frontier family alive. James's hands are our family's primary tools for survival, and watching him fight to restore circulation to fingers that have gone white and senseless reminds me how quickly our situation could turn desperate. The thawing process requires patience that conflicts with every instinct. When flesh becomes frozen, the natural impulse is to warm it as quickly as possible, but rapid rewarming can cause more damage than the initial freezing. James must soak his hands in water that feels merely cool to normal skin, but causes excruciating pain as circulation returns to tissue that has been deprived of blood flow. I sit beside him during these sessions, sometimes holding his arm steady when the pain becomes so intense he cannot help but try to withdraw his hands from the basin. His face goes grey with the effort of enduring the screaming memes, that sensation old-timers describe as thousands of needles stabbing simultaneously into flesh that's coming back to life. "Don't let me pull them out, Sarah," he grits through clenched teeth, and I understand that my role is to be stronger than his pain, to keep him committed to a treatment that hurts worse than the injury it's meant to address. During these moments, I see the raw courage that frontier life demands. Not the heroic courage of dramatic gestures, but the quiet courage of enduring necessary pain, of doing what survival requires regardless of the cost in comfort or dignity. The children watch these sessions with the solemn attention that frontier youth develop early. They're learning that pain is often part of healing, that taking care of each other sometimes means inflicting short-term discomfort to prevent long-term disaster. Emma brings extra towels without being asked. Robert adds wood to the fire to ensure the cabin stays warm while his father recovers. Mary, too young to help practically, offers comfort in her own way, singing small songs or telling her father about the shapes she sees in the flames. As feeling returns to James's fingers, they regain their colour gradually, first flushed red, then gradually returning to normal pink. He flexes them carefully, testing each joint, each knuckle, making sure that full function has been restored. Only when he can make a proper fist and manipulate small objects with precision does he allow himself to relax and accept the cup of hot coffee I've prepared as reward for his endurance. These morning battles with cold are becoming routine, but routine doesn't make them less dangerous. Each time James ventures outside, he risks permanent damage to extremities that we cannot afford to lose. Yet the animals must be tended, water must be hauled, firewood must be brought in. The daily necessities of survival don't pause for weather conditions, no matter how extreme they become. Word came from town today, carried by a rider whose courage I can barely fathom. The railroad is blocked, supply trains trapped in mountain passes by snow deeper than anyone has seen. Those who failed to prepare adequately may not live to regret their oversight. I count our stores obsessively now, each jar and sack a bulwark against starvation. Flour, beans, preserved meat, root vegetables buried in the pit beneath our floor, all calculated to sustain 5 lives for 6 months of isolation. Will it be enough? The winter stretches before us like an eternity, and we've barely begun to fight. Your sister in survival, Sarah. December 12th, 1886. My dear Margaret, 3 days of imprisonment within these 4 walls, and already I see the signs of what this confinement does to the human spirit. The children pace like caged animals, their energy with no outlet save the small dramas they create with carved wooden toys. James grows quiet, contemplative, his eyes fixed on the flames as if they might reveal the secrets of endurance. The psychological challenges of winter confinement reveal themselves in ways I never anticipated during our warmer months of preparation. Robert, normally our most energetic child, has begun talking to himself in elaborate conversations with invisible companions. At first this worried me, but I've come to understand it as his way of creating the social stimulation that our isolated existence cannot provide. He constructs entire communities in his imagination, neighbours who visit our cabin, children his age who join him in adventures, even animals that can speak and offer friendship. Emma responds to confinement differently, becoming almost obsessively helpful. She anticipates my needs before I voice them, organises and reorganises our limited possessions, and has appointed herself the unofficial supervisor of her younger siblings' behaviour. This premature assumption of adult responsibilities touches my heart even as it concerns me. At 7, she should be playing and learning, not bearing the weight of family welfare on her small shoulders. Little Mary, perhaps because she's too young to understand the full implications of our situation, adapts most easily to our reduced circumstances. She creates elaborate games with simple objects. Buttons become people, pieces of cloth become landscapes, shadows on the wall become characters in stories only she can see. Her resilience amazes me and provides a kind of model for the rest of us. If a 4-year-old can find joy and entertainment within these 4 walls, surely the rest of us can learn to do the same. James's quiet periods worry me most. I know him well enough to recognise when he's calculating risks, supplies, and contingencies. His silences aren't peaceful. They're the tense quiet of a man carrying responsibilities too large for any single person to bear. He stares into the fire, not seeking warmth or comfort, but running through endless scenarios. What if the storm lasts longer than expected? What if we're using fuel faster than planned? What if someone becomes seriously ill? What if the spring comes late and our supplies run out before we can hunt or plant? I try to draw him out of these dark reveries, but sometimes the best I can do is sit beside him in companionable silence, my hand resting on his arm to remind him that he's not carrying these burdens alone. In the dancing firelight, I study his profile and see how these years on the frontier have aged him. The man who courted me in Boston was smooth-faced and optimistic. The man beside me now carries lines around his eyes that speak of constant vigilance, of squinting against prairie sun and wind, of the accumulated stress of making life or death decisions on a daily basis. Yet I also see something in his face that wasn't there during our comfortable Boston courtship, a strength that goes deeper than muscle or determination. It's the confidence of someone who has faced genuine hardship and survived, who knows he can protect his family because he has already done so repeatedly. This knowledge comes at a cost, but it also provides a security that our easier former life never offered. The cabin itself seems to shrink during these periods of intense occupancy. During warmer months, when we spend most of our time outside, these walls provide welcome shelter from sun, wind, and rain. But now, when we're confined within them for days at a time, I become aware of every limitation. 14 by 16 feet contains our beds, our table, our stove, our storage, our workspace, and our living area. It must serve as kitchen, dining room, parlour, workshop, schoolroom, and nursery all at once. Privacy becomes impossible under such conditions. Every conversation is overheard. Every mood affects everyone else. Every personal habit becomes a potential source of irritation. The children cannot retreat to separate rooms when they grow tired of each other's company. James and I cannot discuss our worries or fears without little ears listening to every word. Even personal hygiene becomes a challenge that requires careful coordination to ensure minimal disruption to family life. Yet this enforced intimacy also creates opportunities for connection that our busier seasons never allow. With nowhere to go and little to distract us, we discover aspects of each other's personalities that remained hidden during times when work and routine kept us occupied. Emma reveals a talent for creating stories that captivate her siblings for hours. Robert demonstrates an artistic sensibility that shows itself in the way he arranges objects or notices patterns in wood grain and fabric. Mary develops an uncanny ability to sense the emotional state of family members and respond with exactly the kind of comfort each person needs most. Little Emma surprises me with her resilience. At 7, she accepts responsibilities that would challenge children twice her age. Today she helped me card wool, her small fingers learning the motions that keep us clothed and warm. "I'm helping us survive, aren't I, Mama?" she asked, and the simple pride in her voice broke my heart even as it filled me with hope. The wool carding process requires patience and technique that most adults find tedious. Yet Emma approaches it with the focused attention of someone who understands the critical importance of the task. The wool comes from our sheep, sheared last spring and stored carefully through the summer and autumn. Now, as winter deepens and our store-bought clothing shows signs of wear, this wool becomes our insurance against the cold. First, we must clean the raw wool, removing bits of hay, burrs, and other debris that accumulated while it was still growing on the sheep. Emma's small fingers prove surprisingly adept at this delicate work, able to separate foreign matter from wool fibers without damaging the precious material. She works with intense concentration, occasionally holding up a particularly stubborn burr for my inspection before deciding whether it can be removed safely. The actual carding requires coordinated movement of 2 hand cards, rectangular paddles covered with fine wire teeth that catch and align the wool fibers. Emma must hold one card stationary while brushing the wool with the other, gradually working the tangled mass into smooth, parallel strands ready for spinning. The motion is similar to brushing hair, but with much more resistance and the constant risk of catching fingers on the sharp wire teeth. "Watch how the fibers line up, Emma," I guide her, demonstrating the proper angle and pressure. "See how they all begin to face the same direction. That's what makes the yarn strong. All the little pieces working together instead of fighting each other." She nods seriously, understanding that this lesson applies to more than wool processing. On the frontier, everything survives by cooperation. Fibers in yarn, family members in homesteads, neighbours in communities scattered across vast distances. As she works, Emma chatters about her plans for the yarn we're creating. "This batch will be for Papa's new mittens," she announces, "because his old ones are getting holes and his fingers turn white when he works outside." Her awareness of such details amazes me. At 7, she notices things that city children her age would never think to observe: the condition of work clothes, the symptoms of cold exposure, the connection between preparation and survival. The carding session becomes a time for conversation that our usual routines don't always allow. Emma asks questions about our life before the frontier, about you and our family back in Boston, about what will happen when spring comes. Some questions I can answer easily. Others require careful thought about how to explain complex realities to a child who needs hope more than harsh truths. "Mama, why did we come here if it's so hard?" she asks, her hands never pausing in their work. It's a question I've asked myself many times, especially during the darkest moments of winter isolation. How do I explain to a 7-year-old the mixture of ambition, necessity, and faith that drives families to leave comfortable lives for uncertain ones? Sometimes, I tell her, people need to do hard things to build something better for their children. Your papa and I believed that out here, with our own land and our own work, we could create a life where you and Robert and Mary would have opportunities we never had back east. It sounds idealistic even to my own ears, but it's also true. Despite the hardships, despite the constant struggle, we are building something here. A homestead, a family legacy, a place that belongs to us in ways that rented rooms in Boston never could. Emma considers this seriously, her young mind wrestling with concepts that challenge many adults. "So we're doing the hard part now, so life will be easier for our children someday?" she asks. The maturity of her understanding both impresses and saddens me. She's grasping principles of sacrifice and investment that should come later in life, but frontier existence accelerates many aspects of growing up. The restlessness affects us all differently. Robert builds elaborate battles between his toy animals, unconsciously mimicking our own struggle against the elements. Mary, bless her innocent heart, chatters constantly, her 4-year-old voice the only thing that cuts through the oppressive silence of our sealed world. This afternoon became a lesson in necessity when I taught Emma to darn her father's socks. Her needle moved with surprising grace, weaving new life into worn wool. "Like magic," she whispered, not understanding that she was learning the real magic, the skills that transform the broken into the whole, the worn into the useful. These domestic arts have taken on new meaning here. A properly darned sock isn't just mended clothing, it's the difference between healthy feet and frostbite. A well-maintained fire isn't just comfort, it's life itself. Every skill, every task, every moment of preparation becomes part of our battle against a winter that wants nothing more than to claim us. When the children finally slept tonight, James and I spoke of spring planting, an act of faith so profound it borders on the mystical. To plan for crops when the ground lies frozen under 6 feet of snow, to choose seeds when survival occupies every thought, to believe that warmth and growth will return to this frozen wasteland. This is the hope that sustains us. James mentioned the Greens, those poor souls who arrived too late and too unprepared. His worry for them gnaws at both of us. In this wilderness, we are bound together not by law or blood, but by the simple recognition that no one survives alone. Their fate may well become our own should fortune turn against us. The wind howls tonight like something alive and hunting, but we are still here, still warm, still together. For now, that is enough. With love and determination, Sarah, December 21st, 1886, winter solstice. Dearest Margaret, today the sun barely climbed above the horizon before beginning its descent, and yet I write with hope, for this marks the turning point. From this day forward, light begins its slow return to our world. Minutes by precious minutes, the darkness will retreat, and though months of cold remain, we have reached the bottom of winter's pit and begun our climb towards spring. The psychological significance of the solstice cannot be overstated for those of us living through prairie winters. For weeks now, each day has brought less light than the one before, creating a sense of spiraling descent into an abyss of cold and darkness. The shortened days affect more than our practical ability to accomplish outdoor tasks. They weigh on the spirit with a heaviness that's difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't experienced true isolation during the darkest time of year. But today, even though the change is imperceptible to casual observation, we know that the tide has turned. Tomorrow will bring perhaps 30 seconds more daylight than today. The day after that, perhaps a minute more. By the end of January, we'll notice the difference clearly. By February, the change will lift our spirits noticeably. By March, we'll dare to hope that winter's grip is truly loosening. I celebrated this milestone by preparing what amounts to a feast from our carefully hoarded supplies. The salt pork, normally used sparingly to flavour beans or stew, became the centrepiece of a substantial meal. The dried apples, precious reminders of autumn's abundance, transformed into a pie that filled our cabin with aromas of cinnamon and sweetness. The cornbread, enriched with the last of our molasses, became a golden accompaniment worthy of special occasions. The children's faces as they gathered around our small table reminded me why we endure these hardships. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of real meat on her plate, instead of the thin broths and porridge that have become our usual fare. Robert clapped his hands when he saw the pie, understanding that such treats appear only during the most special circumstances. Mary, too young to fully grasp the significance of the day but old enough to recognize celebration, giggled with delight at the feast spread before her. James's surprise at the mittens nearly moved me to tears. He held them in his work-roughened hands with the wonder of someone receiving an unexpected gift, turning them over to examine Mrs. Jensen's expert knitting, running his fingers along the impossibly soft rabbit fur lining. "When did you arrange this?" he asked, and I explained about the pelts he'd forgotten giving her, the careful measurements I'd taken from his old mittens, the secret negotiations conducted during our last trip to town in November. But the real gift wasn't the mittens themselves. It was the reminder that even in our isolation, we're connected to a community that looks after its own. Mrs. Jensen didn't just knit mittens. She created instruments of survival that might save my husband's fingers during the brutal months ahead. Her work represents hours of careful craftsmanship motivated not by payment, but by the understanding that we all depend on each other's welfare. The celebration extended beyond material comforts to the renewal of traditions that connect us to larger human experience. We sang the Christmas carols we learned as children, our voices echoing in the small space with harmonies that transformed our humble cabin into something approaching a chapel. Emma's clear soprano, Robert's enthusiastic if imperfect tenor, Mary's wordless humming that followed melodies she couldn't yet sing properly, James's bass providing foundation for our small choir. As evening deepened and we prepared for bed, I reflected on how this solstice celebration differs from any holiday we observed in our previous life. In Boston, Christmas meant elaborate church services, family gatherings with abundant food, gifts chosen from store shelves filled with manufactured wonders. Here, celebration means the luxury of burning an extra candle, the extravagance of white flour transformed into special bread, the precious gift of mittens knitted by a neighbour's hands. Yet these prairie celebrations carry emotional weight that our Boston holidays never achieved. When abundance is constant, celebration becomes routine. When survival requires daily vigilance, celebration becomes transcendent. A declaration of faith that life offers more than mere endurance, that human beings can create joy and beauty even in the most challenging circumstances. Tonight, as frost forms on our windows in patterns more intricate than any artist could design, and the children sleep soundly with full bellies and warm hearts, I understand that we have marked more than the astronomical beginning of winter's retreat. We have celebrated our own survival, our family's resilience, our community's support, and our faith in the eventual return of warmth and growth to this frozen landscape. The cold this morning defied description. 18 degrees below zero before considering the wind that cuts through clothing like knives through cloth. When James opened the door to tend our animals, the air that entered seemed solid, crystalline, hungry to steal the warmth from our bodies and leave us empty husks. Yet even in this extremity we found cause for celebration. I prepared a feast from our stores, salt pork with beans, dried apples baked into a precious pie, and cornbread rich with the last of our molasses. The children's faces glowed in the firelight as we sang the old songs and told the stories that connect us to warmer times and places. The gifts we exchanged were simple but profound. A rag doll I'd sewn in secret for Mary, her face embroidered with loving care. A wooden horse for Robert, carved by his father's patient hands during long evenings by the fire. For Emma, most precious of all, a book of poetry I'd copied onto precious paper, each letter formed with deliberate beauty. But James surprised me most of all. From beneath our bed he produced mittens of incredible softness, rabbit fur lining, perfectly sized for my hands. Mrs. Jensen's work, he confessed, commissioned months ago and paid for with pelts from his own traps. The thoughtfulness of it, the planning required, the secret kept through weeks of hardship, it moved me to tears. Our Christmas dinner became a communion of survival. We ate slowly, savouring each bite, understanding that abundance is not measured in quantity, but in the miracle of having anything at all when the world outside offers only death. The children's laughter echoed off our walls, pushing back the darkness that presses so constantly against our small sphere of light and warmth. As I write this, frost forms on the very nails in our walls, and our breath creates small clouds in the air of our own home. We sleep with tomorrow's clothes tucked into our bed, a small mercy that makes the morning's dressing bearable. Every trick, every adaptation, every small efficiency becomes part of our arsenal against winter's siege. The howling wind reminds us constantly that we exist at winter's sufferance. But tonight, on this longest night, we have defied the darkness and declared our intention to survive. May it be enough. Your devoted sister, Sarah. December 28th, 1886. My beloved Margaret, the strange days between Christmas and New Year carry their own peculiar weight, as if time itself holds its breath before beginning the long march towards spring. We exist in a bubble of routine and survival, marking time by the rhythm of wood consumed and water melted, by the cycle of tending fire and feeding our small family from dwindling stores. James took advantage of yesterday's calmer weather to assess our firewood supply, and his report troubles me more than I care to admit. We're burning through our stores faster than anticipated. The cold is simply more persistent, more penetrating than in years past. The calculations run constantly behind his eyes now. Logs remaining, buffalo chips in reserve, weeks until the possibility of thaw. I've taken to rationing our lamp oil with miserly care. One precious hour of bright light after dinner, enough for the children's lessons and perhaps a chapter read aloud from our worn books. The rest of our evening unfolds in the dancing shadows cast by firelight. Primitive, perhaps, but there's a beauty in the way flames paint our walls with moving pictures, Little Mary's cough concerns me more each day. What begins as a tickle can become pneumonia with frightening speed in this climate. I dose her with honey and herbs, rub her chest with bear grease before sleep, and watch her breathing with the vigilance of a sentry. In town there are doctors. Out here there is only a mother's love and whatever folk remedies we've carried from older, wiser women. James speaks of strange colours in the sky that the old-timers read like a book of prophecies. More snow coming, he says, perhaps another blizzard. We've rehearsed our emergency preparations until they've become second nature. Guide ropes secured, emergency supplies distributed throughout the cabin, heavy quilts and furs positioned for quick access. The stories reach us still, carried by the occasional hardy rider. Families found frozen just yards from safety, disoriented by wind and snow, until familiar landmarks became alien terrain. We take no chances, trust no assumptions. In winter's domain, the smallest mistake can be the last mistake. Tonight the coyotes sing their hunger to the stars, their voices carrying clearly through air so cold it seems to conduct sound with supernatural clarity. Mary shivers at their calling, but James explains they're more desperate than dangerous, driven from their usual hunting grounds by the same cold that keeps us prisoner. The rifle sleeps loaded beside our bed, a grim acknowledgement that civilization's rules don't apply when survival hangs in the balance. We are not violent people, but winter makes pragmatists of us all. Your sister in endurance, Sarah. January 3rd, 1887. Dear Margaret, a new year has dawned, though nature pays no heed to our human calendars. The cold continues its relentless siege, deepening if anything, transforming our familiar world into an alien landscape where landmarks disappear beneath waves of white, and the very air seems to crystallize and shatter. Today we ventured outside as a family. Bundled in so many layers we resembled walking haystacks more than human beings. The children needed fresh air, movement, a reminder that a world exists beyond our cabin walls. The snow crunched beneath our feet with a sound like breaking glass, and the sun on the white expanse created a brightness that forced us to squint behind makeshift eye shields. 20 minutes was all we could endure before the cold drove us back to our sanctuary, but those 20 minutes transformed the children's spirits. Their cheeks blazed red with cold and exertion, their eyes watered from the wind, but they laughed with a joy I hadn't heard in weeks. Sometimes survival requires not just physical endurance, but the courage to live, to find happiness even in the midst of hardship. Winter sharpens all the senses. The particular creak of snow underfoot becomes as familiar as a neighbour's voice. The quality of light, so clear, so unforgiving, reveals details normally hidden. Smells intensify us confined space of our cabin. Smoke from the constant fire, the earthy scent of root vegetables, the lanolin in wool, the indefinable but unmistakable odour of bodies that haven't seen a proper bath in months. James inspected our barn roof today, mindful of stories from the winter of '81 when 3 barns collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow. It's dangerous work, balancing on ice-slicked surfaces to clear the load, but necessary. Everything here is necessary. Every task a small battle in the larger war against winter's determination to claim us. The children notice changes in themselves that break my heart. Emma asked today when her real hands would return, meaning her summer hands, brown and nimble, not these chapped and swollen appendages that struggle with delicate tasks. I promised her that spring would restore what winter has stolen, though I pray I'm not making promises I cannot keep. Tonight, As coyotes sing their loneliness to the stars and frost forms patterns on our windows like nature's own calligraphy, I think about the strange democracy of winter. Rich or poor, prepared or foolish, winter treats us all with the same indifference. It's a harsh teacher, but perhaps a fair one. We are still here, still fighting, still hoping. With all my love, Sarah. January 9th, 1887. My dearest sister, for 3 days we have lived at the mercy of a blizzard that seems determined to erase all human presence from this landscape. It began without warning, a wall of white that swallowed the horizon, and then the world, reducing our universe to the small sphere of warmth we've created within these log walls. The storm approached with the inexorable persistence of a natural disaster that transforms familiar landscapes into alien terrain. One moment, James was working in the barn under a grey but navigable sky. The next, he burst through our door with snow clinging to every surface of his clothing, shouting for me to help him secure the guide rope before visibility disappeared completely. The speed with which the storm engulfed us defied everything I thought I understood about weather patterns. In the space of perhaps 10 minutes, our world shrank from a radius of several miles, within which we could see the distant hills, the neighbour's fence line, the landmarks that oriented us within the familiar geography of home, to a radius of perhaps 10 feet beyond our door, and then to nothing at all but swirling white chaos. The wind that drives this blizzard possesses a voice unlike anything in normal human experience. It doesn't merely blow, it screams with the fury of something alive and malevolent. The sound penetrates our cabin walls despite their solid construction, creating a constant auditory assault that makes normal conversation impossible and sleep fitful at best. The children huddle closer to the stove not just for warmth, but for psychological comfort, seeking protection from sounds that seem to threaten the very foundations of our shelter. But perhaps more disturbing than the wind's voice is its power to find weaknesses in our defences that we never knew existed. Snow forces itself through gaps between logs that we thought perfectly sealed, creating small drifts inside our home that remind us constantly of winter's determination to claim even our most protected spaces. The wind drives these snow particles with such force that they penetrate cracks too small to see, accumulating in corners and along baseboards despite our best efforts at construction. James spent the first day of the storm moving constantly around the cabin's interior, checking for new infiltration points and attempting temporary repairs with whatever materials we had available. Cloth stuffed into suddenly visible gaps, furniture repositioned to block drafts, blankets hung strategically to create additional barriers against the cold that seeps relentlessly through any available opening. The psychological effects of such confinement reveal themselves in ways I never anticipated. On the first day, we maintained something approaching normal routine, meals at regular times, lessons for the children, household tasks performed according to usual schedules. By the second day, these routines began to break down as the storm's persistence wore away our pretense that this was merely temporary inconvenience. Robert, normally our most energetic child, became almost lethargic, lying by the fire for hours without moving, occasionally making small sounds that weren't quite words. Emma responded in the opposite direction, becoming hyperactive and talkative, chattering constantly about anything that entered her mind as if her voice could somehow push back the wall of sound that surrounded us. Mary, perhaps because she's too young to fully understand the danger, adapted most easily, treating the storm as an exciting adventure that required new kinds of games. The most challenging aspect of our confinement isn't physical discomfort. We're warm enough, adequately fed, and reasonably secure within our walls. It's the knowledge that we are completely cut off from all human contact beyond our family, that if disaster strikes now, no help can reach us, and that our survival depends entirely on resources and preparations we've already made. There's no possibility of borrowing from neighbours, seeking help from town, or even communicating our situation to anyone who might be concerned about our welfare. Food rationing became serious on the second day of the storm, not because our supplies are inadequate for normal consumption, but because we have no way of knowing how long these conditions will persist. 2 meals daily instead of 3, with portion sizes reduced to ensure that our stores will last regardless of how many additional days we might remain trapped. The children accept these restrictions with the stoic understanding that frontier life has taught them. When resources are limited, everyone sacrifices equally. James barely had time to string our lifeline, the guide rope between house and barn, before visibility vanished completely. Without that rope, a person could become lost in the 20 yards between door and shelter, wandering in fatal circles while safety lay just beyond reach. The stories of such deaths haunt every frontier family. The wind doesn't merely blow, it screams with the voice of something alive and furious. It finds every microscopic gap in our defences, forcing snow through cracks we thought perfectly sealed. Small drifts form on our windowsills inside the cabin, remind us that winter's reach extends even into our most protected spaces. Sleep has become dangerous. We take turns through the night, ensuring the fire never dies down to mere coals. Without constant heat, our sanctuary becomes a tomb. The children sleep in a nest of blankets and furs beside the stove, while James and I have moved our bed closer to the heart of our small world. Food rationing has become grimly serious. 2 meals daily instead of 3, and those reduced to essentials: thin cornmeal porridge with a morsel of salt pork for flavour, beans stretched with the memory of meat. The children accept these restrictions without complaint, understanding with the grave wisdom of frontier youth that survival requires sacrifice. When I checked our thermometer at noon yesterday, the mercury had disappeared below the scale entirely. A travelling doctor later told us it likely reached 40 degrees below zero, and that was before calculating the wind that turned air itself into a weapon. The silence that follows such storms carries its own weight. When the wind finally ceased its shrieking, the quiet seemed to press against our ears like a physical presence. The thick blanket of snow muffles all sound from outside, creating an isolation so complete we might be the last family on Earth. James climbed into our small attic space to relieve the weight of snow on our roof, a terrifying necessity that could easily have resulted in the entire load sliding off to bury anyone standing below. But the alternative was the roof collapsing under the burden, and we've all heard stories of families crushed in their beds by the very shelters meant to protect them. I keep the children occupied with games and stories, but resources grow thin. We play I Spy, though there's precious little to spy in our one-room world. Emma teaches Mary to knit using smooth sticks and unravelled yarn. Robert helps his father with small repairs, learning that everyone must contribute to survival. Water has become a constant concern. Melting snow is laborious and consumes precious fuel. Tomorrow, if the snowfall stops, James will attempt to reach the creek for ice that melts more efficiently than the fluffy snow that accumulates around our door. Time moves strangely during a blizzard. Hours crawl while days vanish. The only constants are the fire that must never die and the cold that must never win. Your sister in the storm, Sarah. January 11th, 1887. Beloved Margaret, the blizzard has passed. leaving behind a world transformed beyond recognition. Where familiar landmarks once stood, there are now only smooth waves of white, punctuated by the dark verticals of fence posts and the occasional skeletal remains of trees. Our world has been simplified, reduced to its essential elements: shelter, fire, and the precious lives we protect within these walls. James ventured to the barn at first light, following our lifeline through snow that in places reached above his waist. The animals survived, huddled together for warmth, frost coating their backs like armour, but alive. The relief I felt at this news was overwhelming. Without our livestock, spring would bring not renewal but slow starvation. The barn itself had become a crystalline cave. Frost coated every surface: walls, manger, even the animals' feed troughs. James spent hours clearing a path to the creek, then chopping through nearly 2 feet of ice to reach the water beneath. His pulley system for hauling the barrels back proved its worth, safer than attempting to carry them across treacherous, snow-hidden obstacles. The world outside has been rendered alien. Familiar paths have vanished, fence lines are suggestions beneath the drifts, and the distance to our neighbours, never short, has become essentially infinite. When the sun broke through briefly, the glare off the snow was blinding. We've taken to using darkened cloth tied around our eyes when working outside, a technique James learned from the Lakota to prevent snow blindness. This storm has severed us even more completely from our scattered community. No one will travel for days, perhaps weeks. I find myself wondering about each family. Did the Jensen's sturdy barn withstand the wind? Are the Green children warm tonight? Did old Mr. Patterson's supply of medicine last through the worst of it? This not knowing may be winter's cruelest torture, the inability to help when help is needed, the uncertainty about whether friends and neighbours still draw breath. We who pride ourselves on community cooperation are reduced to hoping and praying from a distance, each family fighting its own battle against the same implacable enemy. Tonight I'm boiling beans that have soaked since morning, their earthy smell bringing comfort through its very ordinariness. James reads aloud from The Pilgrim's Progress. Christians' trials seeming almost familiar now that we face our own journey through a hostile landscape toward a distant promised land. Outside, temperatures plummet with nightfall, and our cabin's walls pop and creak as the wood contracts in the cold. We've hung quilts over our windows for additional insulation, creating a cocoon that blocks our view of the alien world beyond. Tonight, that world might as well be another planet, so foreign and hostile has it become. But we are here, we are warm, and we are together. In this place, at this time, that constitutes victory. Your loving sister, Sarah, January 12, 1887. My dear Margaret, the storm has finally released its grip on our small corner of the world, though its aftermath presents challenges nearly as daunting as the blizzard itself. Snow has drifted against our north wall nearly to the roofline, creating a barrier that James spent most of the day excavating with methodical determination. This morning's revelation of our transformed landscape left us speechless. The familiar geography of our homestead, the path to the creek, the distant hills that marked our boundaries, even our own yard, has been erased and redrawn by wind and snow. We exist now on an ocean of white, with only the dark verticals of fence posts and trees to remind us that the world we knew still exists beneath this crystalline burial shroud. The sun on fresh snow creates a brightness that sears the eyes and makes the simplest outdoor tasks treacherous. We've fashioned eye protection from strips of darkened cloth, a necessity that makes us look like bandits but prevents the temporary blindness that can be fatal in such conditions. James devoted the day to digging paths to essential destinations: barn, outhouse, the creek for water. I helped when possible, leaving Emma to supervise her younger siblings with the seriousness of a frontier child who understands that responsibility isn't optional. The physical labour was almost welcome after days of confinement, even though each shovelful of snow felt like lifting lead. We lost 2 chickens to the cold, found them frozen in the coop despite their huddled arrangements for warmth. The survivors seem weak but determined, much like ourselves. The cow and horse came through the ordeal, though their condition worries James. Another storm like the one we've just endured could finish them, and without our animals, spring would bring its own form of desperation. News reached us late today through a rider whose courage I can barely comprehend. Venturing out in such conditions to carry word between isolated homesteads. The toll on the territory's cattle herds has been catastrophic. Thousands upon thousands dead, frozen where they stood or piled against fence lines where they sought shelter that never came. The large ranching operations from back east are facing complete ruin. Their cattle, left to roam free without supplemental shelter or feed, paid the ultimate price for their owners' ignorance of plains winters. Those who came here thinking they could impose Eastern methods on Western realities are learning the cost of such arrogance. Local families who understood this land's demands have fared better, though none escaped unscathed. We who built proper shelters, stored adequate feed, and respected winter's power have lost animals but not hope. The rider brought other news, darker than cattle losses. The Johnsons lost their youngest when their fire died overnight. Such reports chill me more thoroughly than any wind. Tonight I hold my children closer, grateful for their warm breathing against my neck, for the solid walls that surround us, for the fire that keeps death at bay. In the arithmetic of survival, we are still blessed. Your sister in gratitude, Sarah. January 15th, 1887. Dearest Margaret, 3 days of relative peace have allowed us to assess the toll winter has taken on our small family. The physical signs are unmistakable. James has lost weight, his belt requiring new holes to keep his trousers secure. The children's faces show the gauntness of careful rationing, though I try to ensure they receive the most nourishing portions our stores allow. My own hands tell the story of winter's assault, chapped and cracked despite regular applications of rendered fat, the skin splitting at the knuckles in painful fissures that heal slowly in the dry air. We all bear these marks now, badges of our battle against the elements. Yet there's something else developing alongside the physical hardship, a mental toughness I see growing in each of us. Emma accepts responsibilities that would challenge older children, doing so without complaint or self-pity. Robert absorbs his father's lessons with the seriousness of someone who understands that knowledge means survival. Even Mary at 4 has learned patience that seems impossible for her age. They're becoming true frontier children, shaped by the understanding that life offers no guarantees, that comfort must be earned anew each day, that small pleasures, a cup of warm milk, a story by firelight, a simple game of checkers, become precious when set against the backdrop of constant vigilance. Today brought an unexpected visitor who tested our commitment to the frontier code of mutual assistance. Mr. Green appeared at our door near noon, half frozen despite his layers, bringing news that his family had survived the blizzard, but their food stores were nearly exhausted. They had underestimated winter's duration and ferocity, a mistake that could prove fatal. James didn't hesitate. He gathered a sack of our precious flour, dried beans, and a portion of our salt pork, supplies that will mean leaner times for us, but might save the Green family from starvation. "We can't eat knowing they're starving," he said simply, expressing the philosophy that governs life out here. "This isn't charity in the conventional sense, it's mutual insurance. Today we help the Greens. Next month, we might be the ones in desperate need. No government agency exists to provide relief on these plains. We are each other's safety net, bound together by the understanding that none of us survives alone. This evening I'm rendering tallow for candles, a tedious but necessary task that fills our cabin with smells that aren't entirely pleasant, but represent light and warmth in the darkness to come. The process requires patience, melting carefully saved fat, straining it through cloth, pouring it into moulds with cotton wicks positioned precisely. James has grown unusually quiet since the storm, and tonight he confessed his worry about our firewood supply. We're consuming fuel faster than anticipated, and winter shows no signs of retreat. Tomorrow he'll search for deadwood along the creek. Dangerous work in such cold, but necessary if we're to maintain our defences against the elements. I suggested increasing our use of buffalo chips, which we stored in abundance during the autumn, saving our precious wood for the coldest nights. It's a sensible compromise, but I see the constant calculations running behind his eyes. How many weeks until spring? How many logs remain? How cold might the nights yet become? Such mathematics keeps us alive, though at the cost of peace of mind. Your sister in solidarity, Sarah. January 19th, 1887. Beloved Margaret, today brought what we dare to call warmth. 0 degrees without the knife edge of wind that has been our constant companion. The sun actually had strength enough to create dripping from our eaves, the first liquid water we've seen in weeks. It felt almost tropical after what we've endured, though I know how absurd that must sound to anyone living in civilized comfort. We seized the opportunity to tackle the dreaded winter washing, a task that requires heating water in every available vessel, scrubbing clothes on our wooden washboard until hands go numb, then hanging everything to freeze dry on lines strung throughout our cabin. The process fills our small space with steam and the sharp scent of lye soap, creating humidity that fogs our windows and makes breathing feel thick and warm. By evening, our hands were raw despite repeated applications of grease, but the result, clean clothes, clean bedding, brought a satisfaction that's difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't lived in winter's enforced squalor. Cleanliness becomes a luxury out here, a small victory against the elements that seem determined to reduce us to our most primitive state. The children contributed as they could, even little Mary sorting stockings into pairs with the concentration of someone performing vital work. Afterward, we celebrated with cornbread made with the last of our molasses, a treat I'd been saving for just such a day when spirits needed lifting. Their faces, bright with the rare sweetness and the accomplishment of helping their family survive, reminded me why we endure these hardships. James used the improved weather to venture further from our cabin than he has since the Great Blizzard, checking fence lines and searching for signs of the predators that winter drives closer to human habitation. He found tracks circling our barn, wolves or coyotes seeking easy prey, but no evidence of attempts to break in yet. Still, the rifle will sleep even closer to our bed tonight. More troubling was his report that the green cabin showed no smoke from its chimney, no signs of life despite the relatively moderate conditions. It's possible they're simply conserving fuel during daylight hours, but James plans to ride over tomorrow if the weather holds. 5 days have passed since Mr. Green's desperate visit, and much can change in 5 winter days on the frontier. I've been reflecting on how this season alters our very perception of reality. Time becomes elastic. Hours can feel like days when you're waiting for a storm to pass, while entire weeks vanish in the routine of survival. Distances that seem trivial in summer become insurmountable in winter. Even our bodies change, bulked with layers until we move like Arctic explorers in our own homes. The children notice these transformations too. Today, Emma asked when her real hands would return, meaning her summer hands tanned and quick, not these red and swollen appendages that struggle with fine motor tasks. I promised her that spring would restore what winter has temporarily stolen, though I wonder what other changes this season will work upon us all. Your sister in adaptation, Sarah, January 25th, 1887. My dearest Margaret, another storm has come and gone, smaller than the great blizzard but still carrying enough fury to remind us that winter hasn't finished with us yet. We're settling into rhythms now, finding a kind of stability within the extremity that has become our daily existence. Our days follow patterns worn smooth by necessity. Rise before dawn to coax the banked fire back to life, melt snow for washing and drinking water, prepare hot porridge with whatever dried fruit our stores allow, bundle ourselves for the essential outdoor tasks, tend to animals that depend on us for their survival, haul firewood and buffalo chips for the next day's battles, return to the sanctuary of our cabin for repairs and maintenance, prepare our midday meal while light allows us to see clearly, spend afternoons on indoor work, mending, teaching, maintaining the tools that keep us alive, secure everything for another night's siege, and sleep the fitful sleep of those who know that vigilance is the price of survival. The sameness of these days can wear on the mind as surely as the cold wears on the body. James calls it cabin fever, when someone grows snappish or falls into the deep silence that can precede despair. He's learned to create variety where he can, suggesting new projects, rearranging our few pieces of furniture to make the space feel fresh, telling stories that transport us beyond these walls to warmer places and easier times. Emma has taken over Robert's education with the seriousness of a frontier teacher, using our precious slate board to guide him through letters and numbers. Mary, supposedly too young to benefit from such lessons, has absorbed more than we realized. Today she counted to 20 without prompting, her small voice proud of this accomplishment that represents hours of patient repetition. Our clothing has become our armor in this war against the elements. Layer upon layer, wool long underwear next to the skin, never cotton, which kills by drawing heat away once it becomes damp. Flannel shirts and wool vests, heavy jackets that make us look like walking bundles of fabric. For James, leather chaps over wool trousers. For the girls and myself, multiple skirts that create insulating air pockets, multiple pairs of wool socks, then boots waterproofed with bear grease, mittens instead of gloves, keeping fingers together for shared warmth, and never, ever a bare head. Wool caps pulled low, ideally with ear flaps, because the old-timers say you lose half your body heat through an uncovered head. Whether or not that's medically accurate, I've seen the frost-blackened ears that result from ignoring such wisdom. The cold has become our teacher, instructing us with scars and close calls, rewarding attention and punishing carelessness with an impartiality that's almost admirable. We learn, or we pay the price. There are no second chances in winter's classroom. Your sister in education, Sarah, January 28th, 1887. Dearest sister, James returned from his journey to town bearing news that confirms our gravest fears about this winter's toll on the territory. The cattle losses exceed even our worst predictions. Entire herds wiped out, animals frozen where they grazed or piled against fence lines in futile searches for shelter from winds that showed no mercy. The journey to town itself required courage I can barely comprehend. 23 miles across snow-covered prairie, following landmarks that winter has transformed beyond easy recognition, risking disorientation that could prove fatal if the weather changed suddenly. James left before dawn with our horse hitched to the small sled he built last autumn, carrying emergency supplies in case he became stranded overnight, and wearing every piece of protective clothing our family owns. His description of the landscape between our homestead and town paints a picture of devastation that will reshape the entire territorial economy. Where autumn fields once showed the golden stubble of harvested grain, there are now only smooth expanses of snow broken by dark mounds that mark the locations of frozen cattle. Some died singly, others in clusters where they sought the illusory protection of fence corners or the slight windbreak provided by scattered trees. The most disturbing sight, James reported, was a group of nearly 50 head of cattle that had gathered in a shallow draw, apparently seeking shelter from the wind. The draw became a trap when blowing snow filled it like a bowl, burying the animals where they stood. Their carcasses, partially visible as dark spots in the snow, create a grim monument to the power of plains weather and the inadequacy of preparation based on Eastern experience. Mr. Harrison's general store has become an unofficial centre for sharing news and coordinating assistance among families scattered across the territory. The conversations James overheard paint a picture of economic disaster that extends far beyond individual tragedies. The large ranching consortiums that invested Eastern capital in Western cattle operations are facing complete financial ruin. These operations, funded by investors who viewed cattle ranching as a guaranteed return on investment, were managed by men who had never experienced plains winters. They allowed their herds to roam freely across thousands of acres, assuming that animals accustomed to outdoor life could survive whatever weather nature provided. They built minimal shelter, stored inadequate feed, and made no provisions for supplemental care during extreme conditions. The result is catastrophic losses that will bankrupt not only the ranching operations themselves, but also the banks that financed them, the railroads that depended on cattle shipments for revenue, and the communities that grew up around the cattle trade. Entire towns that seemed prosperous and permanent just months ago now face abandonment as the economic foundation that supported them crumbles under winter's assault. Yet the news isn't uniformly devastating. Smaller operations managed by men who understood plains conditions are surviving with losses they can absorb. These farmers and ranchers built proper barns, stored adequate hay, and brought their animals close to home where they could provide daily care during the worst weather. Their success demonstrates the difference between working with the land's demands and trying to impose inappropriate methods from different climates. James also brought news of individual families throughout the territory, some encouraging, others heartbreaking. The Anderson family survived by bringing their livestock into their house during the worst of the storms, sharing living space with cattle and horses for nearly a week rather than losing them to the cold. The smell, the inconvenience, and the chaos of such arrangements seem trivial compared to the alternative of watching their animals freeze. The Kramer homestead, located in a particularly exposed area 15 miles north of town, remains completely cut off. Their cabin is reportedly buried to the roofline in drifted snow, with the family surviving on stored provisions and melted snow until rescue becomes possible. Volunteers are organizing to dig them out as soon as weather permits, though no one knows what conditions they'll find when they finally reach the buried cabin. But there are darker stories as well. Families found too late. Homesteads standing empty when neighbors finally managed to fight their way through the snow. The Peterson family, newcomers from Ohio who arrived just last spring, were discovered frozen in their bed after their fire went out during a night when temperatures dropped below 40 degrees below zero. 3 children and their parents, claimed by a combination of inadequate fuel supplies and inexperience with the demands of plane survival. Such news weighs heavily on all of us who have survived the winter thus far. We recognize our own vulnerability in every tragedy, understand how thin the margin is between our current safety and the disasters that have befallen others. Success in frontier survival often depends on factors beyond human control. A chimney that draws properly, a stove that functions reliably, animals that remain healthy, supplies that last as long as anticipated. The economic implications of this winter's disasters will reshape the entire territory for years to come. The large-scale cattle operations that dominated the landscape and the politics of the region are disappearing, taking with them the vision of the West as a place where Eastern capital could generate easy profits through extensive land use and minimal labor investment. What emerges instead will likely be smaller scale, more intensive operations managed by people who understand that success here requires constant attention to local conditions and respect for natural forces that cannot be controlled or predicted with certainty. For families like ours, the collapse of the cattle industry creates both challenges and opportunities. The economic disruption means that markets for our grain and other products may disappear temporarily, making self-sufficiency even more critical than we already understood it to be. But it also means that land prices will drop, making it possible for us to expand our holdings if we can survive the immediate crisis and accumulate the resources needed for investment in a transformed economy. Tonight, as I write these words by the light of our carefully rationed lamp oil, I'm acutely aware that we have witnessed more than weather disasters. We have seen the collision between human ambition and natural reality, and watched reality win decisively. The lessons are harsh, but clear. This land demands respect, preparation, and humility from those who would call it home. Mr. Harrison at the general store reports rail cars standing empty at the stations, waiting for cattle shipments that will never come. The banks that finance the large ranching operations are calling in loans that cannot be repaid, foreclosing on dreams that turn to nightmares in the space of a few brutal weeks. Several of the biggest outfits have declared bankruptcy, their owners returning east with nothing to show for years of investment and ambition. These were men who came here thinking they could impose Eastern methods on Western realities, who believed that capital and confidence could overcome the harsh truths of plains weather. Yet those who listened to local wisdom, who built modestly and prepared carefully, are surviving. Their losses are significant but not total. The smaller homesteaders who understood this land's demands, who built proper shelters and stored adequate hay, emerge wounded but not broken. There's a harsh lesson in these contrasts, about respecting rather than conquering the land, about the difference between arrogance and courage, about the wisdom that comes from listening to those who've faced these trials before. The frontier doesn't care about your previous success or your financial backing. It judges everyone by the same merciless standards. James also brought word of families throughout the territory. The Andersons lost their barn but saved their animals by bringing them into their house, living with cattle and horses for 3 days rather than losing them to the storm. The Kramers are snowed in completely, their cabin buried to the roofline, surviving on stored food and melted snow until the thaw allows rescue. But there are darker stories too. The Peterson homestead stands empty. The family found frozen in their bed when neighbours finally managed to reach them after the storm. Their fire had died sometime in the night, and without its protection, they simply went to sleep and never woke. 3 children and their parents, claimed by a few hours of inadequate fuel. Such news weighs heavily on all of us. We see ourselves in every story, recognize our own vulnerability in each tragedy. The line between survival and disaster is measured in degrees of temperature, pounds of firewood, or the reliability of a single stove that must never fail. Tonight, as I write these words by carefully rationed lamplight and listen to my family's breathing in the warm cocoon we've created, I'm acutely aware of how precious and precarious our situation truly is. We live by the grace of preparation, the blessing of adequate supplies, and the daily miracle of a fire that continues to burn. But we are still here, still fighting, still hoping for spring's eventual return. Tonight, as frost forms patterns on our windows that rival the most intricate lacework you've ever seen, and our children sleep peacefully in the warmth and safety we've managed to preserve, I understand that we have been witness to something larger than personal survival. We have observed the fundamental test that this land presents to all who would claim it, the test of whether human determination, preparation, and community cooperation can overcome the most extreme challenges nature can devise. The answer, as this winter has demonstrated with brutal clarity, is both yes and no. Those who approach this land with respect, who learn from indigenous wisdom and local experience, who prepare thoroughly and maintain the humility to acknowledge their limitations, can indeed survive and even prosper. But those who bring arrogance, who rely on distant capital rather than local knowledge, who assume that success in other places guarantees success here, will find themselves broken by forces they never bothered to understand. As I prepare to close this chronicle of our winter survival, I'm aware that spring still lies months away, and that our trials are far from over. The cold will deepen further before it retreats. Our supplies will dwindle before they can be replenished. The isolation will continue until the snow melts enough to make travel safe again. We may face emergencies I cannot now anticipate, challenges that will test us in ways this winter has not yet demanded. But we are still here, Margaret, still alive, still together, still fighting for the dream that brought us to this harsh and beautiful land. The children are growing stronger and more capable with each challenge they meet. James becomes daily more skilled at reading the signs that keep us safe. And I am learning that I possess reserves of strength and determination I never knew existed during our easier days in Boston. Whatever the remainder of this winter may bring, we will meet it with the knowledge that we have already survived what many could not. We will face it as a family bound together by shared hardship and mutual dependence. We will endure it with the support of neighbours who understand that in this place, everyone's survival depends on everyone else's success. And when spring finally comes, as it must come, as it always comes, despite winter's seeming permanence, we will plant our crops with hands that have known true cold, build our future with minds that understand genuine hardship, and appreciate warmth and abundance with hearts that have learned their true value through temporary absence. This land tests everyone who comes to it, Margaret, but it also transforms them. We are not the same people who left Boston 7 years ago, and our children will not become the same adults they might have been had we remained in comfort and safety. Whether this transformation is ultimately blessing or curse, I cannot yet say. But I know that it is complete and irreversible, and that whatever we become because of it will be authentic in ways that our former lives never allowed us to achieve. Your sister in survival, in growth, and in hope, Sarah. P.S. If these letters reach you, dear Margaret, know that we survived this winter, and that our love for you and our family back east remains constant despite the distance and hardships that separate us. If they do not reach you, know that we died as we lived on this frontier, together, fighting for our dreams, and grateful for the love that sustained us through every trial. Epilogue, March 15, 1887. My dearest Margaret, spring has come at last to our corner of the Nebraska Territory, and with it, the opportunity to send these letters to you through a postal service that winter's grip had held closed for nearly 4 months. As I prepare to dispatch this chronicle of our survival, the evidence of winter's passage lies melting all around us. Great drifts settling into puddles, ice breaking up on our creek with sounds like distant thunder, the first tentative green shoots pushing through soil that seemed permanently frozen just weeks ago. We survived, all 5 of us, though not unchanged by the experience. James bears new lines around his eyes and a grey streak in his beard that wasn't there last autumn. The children have grown taller and more serious, their play now incorporating lessons learned from months of understanding that survival requires constant attention to practical details, and I find myself looking at our simple cabin, our modest possessions, our hard-won safety with a gratitude so profound it sometimes brings tears to my eyes. The territory around us is transformed as well. The great cattle operations that dominated the political and economic landscape have largely disappeared, their eastern investors bankrupted by losses they never imagined possible. The land lies empty now in many places, waiting for new kinds of people with different approaches to the challenges of plains life. But families like ours, those who built carefully, prepared thoroughly, and learned to respect rather than dominate this harsh landscape, have emerged stronger and more confident in our ability to create lasting homes in this demanding place. We have passed winter's test and found ourselves worthy of the land we claim. Whatever challenges the future may bring, we face them with the knowledge that we have already endured the worst this territory can offer and emerged victorious. The letters I'm sending you represent more than a chronicle of one family's winter survival. They are testament to the transformation that this land works on everyone who commits to it completely. Evidence of the strength that emerges when human determination meets natural challenge, and proof that civilization can indeed take root in even the most demanding circumstances. When you read these words in the comfort of your Boston home, remember that they were written by a lamplight while snow piled against our walls, and wind howled like something alive and hunting. Remember that each page represents a small victory over conditions that might easily have defeated us, and that the woman who wrote them has become someone you might not recognize but would surely admire. We are building something here, Margaret. Not just a homestead or a farm, but a way of life that honors both human ambition and natural limits, that creates prosperity through cooperation rather than exploitation, that finds beauty and meaning in the midst of hardship and challenge. It is work that will take generations to complete, but we have begun it, and our children will continue it, and their children after them will inherit a land that has been shaped by respect rather than conquered by force. Give my love to all our family, tell them we think of them often, and know that despite the miles and hardships that separate us, the bonds of affection remain as strong as ever. Perhaps someday, when the railroad reaches deeper into our territory and travel becomes less hazardous, you will visit us here and see for yourself what we have built from nothing but determination, hard work, and faith in the future. Until then, I remain your loving sister, forever changed but forever faithful, Sarah Bennett, pioneer woman of the Nebraska Territory, March 15th, 1887.